With the 2020 elections right around the corner, do you know who is trying to influence you and how they're doing it? Listen on to learn about the ins and outs of disinformation, misinformation, interference, and influence. Morgan is an internationally recognized expert on cybersecurity strategy, cyberterrorism, and advanced technology. His landmark testimony before Congress on healthcare.gov changed how the government collected personally identifiable information. He has made hundreds of appearances on national news, radio, print, and web, and has spoken to audiences around the world. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Prey Podcast. Morgan, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey Podcast today.
You know, the only reason I joined, and I'll just be honest. No, I like what you guys do. My wife is a huge fan of John Sanford, and John Sanford writes all the prey books, Easy Prey, Dark Prey, Bird of Prey. So when I told her I was going to be on the Easy Prey podcast, at first she thought, John Sanford. I said, no, not him, but somebody almost quite as famous.
Oh, wow. I like that. I like to be famous. No. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about, I'm going to get this right, disinformation, misinformation, interference, and influence in the 2020 U.S. elections. But before we dive in, can you share a little bit about your background with the audience?
Sure. Yeah. Originally when I was a youth, my dad was actually military. My dad was a World War II and a Vietnam vet. So I was an Army brat, born at Fort Riley, but we moved around the world. And the first foreign country I lived in, I grew up in Tehran, Iran during the days of the Shah. So my first foreign language I spoke was Farsi.
Oh, wow.
So I was there during the 60s, moved back to Kansas, which is where I was born at in Fort Riley. Ended up going to college when I was a freshman in college, just when the Iranian Revolution happened. And so I had a lot of interesting conversations, things like that. But I was a music major in college, believe it or not, but I gravitated towards law enforcement. So I started off on Salina PD, bunch of fine folks in the middle of north central Kansas there. Then I became a state trooper and moved out to southwest Kansas, which is where I met my wife that I've been married to now for 33 years, going on 34. And she was a dispatcher and records person at the police department. But I was always interested. I moved into investigations. I went to work at the police department because I wanted to get into investigations. The State Patrol is not an investigative agency. The KBI was, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. But I wanted to get into investigations, investigate violent crime, investigate. And so I started doing that, but I started doing computer crime stuff. I got nominated to do computer stuff because I was the guy who knew how to turn on the first Gateway P75 computers, network them together with the BNC cables. And I understood Windows for Workgroups 3.11, so.
Unfortunately, you're dating yourself.
Oh, boy, wait till I date myself. When I was teaching computer crime and when I went through my first computer crime course, we were using Norton Disk Editor. And the hard drives, the first hard drive I examined was 40 megabytes. It was partitioned into a 32 megabyte C drive and an 8 megabyte D drive because that's all DOS could support at that time. So, yeah, I go way back. Hey, look, don't date me too much. It wasn't Bill Gates who said one time famously 640K of RAM ought to be enough for everyone.
Yep.
But, so I had this thing. I love the people side of it. I love the technology side. I actually used to do a lot of stuff. I went through advanced homicide training and investigation, serial crime profiling. One of my original instructors was one of the original members of the FBI's behavioral science unit. So I went through the violent criminal apprehension program training, VICAP. So I had this fascination with people, but I also had this fascination with technology. So kind of fast forwarding, I knew I needed to make a change because really it's hard to move up when you're out in Southwest Kansas, smaller agencies. I got involved in a lot of neat stuff, the Oklahoma City bombing. I worked with the FBI on things like that, but I wanted to play on a bigger stage. So kind of had to step out, do some stuff. Actually, Microsoft was one of my first big clients. I did all their worldwide anti-piracy investigations for them. In fact, the first anti-piracy case that we did online resulted in the first ever civil judgment against an online uploader of pirated software. So I would go out to Redmond, Washington, and do stuff. So one thing led to another. Ended up coming out to Virginia, working for a big defense contractor, working in the justice and the intelligence community. I was down in Bogota working on Plan Colombia. So we were down there with the good folks down there. And then 9/11 happened, and I was in the Reagan building on 9/11. So we're supposed to be in the Pentagon that morning. Meetings got switched, and so our whole focus changed to what we were working on. So a lot of the work I originally did was it was called the Counterintelligence Field Activity Joint Counterintelligence Assessment Group, part of DoD. We were working with some three-letter agency kind of stuff to develop these big systems that could analyze massive amounts of data, identify risk, and be able to shorten the decision-making cycle, what they call the OODA loop. We wanted to get inside the decision-making cycle of our adversaries. And so I ended up working there. Then I worked at the Department of Justice on a huge information sharing program. I was the lead subject matter expert, actually drafted what they call the concept of operations. So a lot of what law enforcement does now was based on the original design we did back in 2004, 2005, consolidation of the terrorist watch lists. I mean, I'm sorry, I was kind of going off because so much of this stuff is because it involves people and technology. It's like you're talking about terrorists, but at the same time, how do you bring 25 separate systems together to make sure we're identifying the correct person, protect privacy of citizens and people at the same time, but still provide actionable intelligence, to our folks. So did that. I became a senior advisor in the U.S. Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program, was over in Pakistan, Turkey, had a lot of fun doing stuff like that. But at the same time, I was in the big corporate environment doing this kind of work. So I was at Cisco, ran their global public safety. Got to actually do some work. Here's an interesting thing. I was the technical advisor for the show America's Most Wanted for a little over a year. One of the solutions I developed was actually featured on the 1000th episode of America's Most Wanted. So again, it's that intersection of chasing the bad guy, developing technology. And then my last official, quote, corporate job, I was a vice president out at Alcatel-Lucent Bell Labs. So we built the first public safety broadband network. Now it's called FirstNet. So you kind of come full circle. And so I've been a senior fellow at the Center for Digital Government. And then my current gig is I'm the chief security advisor for SentinelOne. So really wicked cool company doing stuff with artificial intelligence, machine learning. And, really it's a game changer in terms of how we approach defending against the threat. So, but I've always stayed involved I used to teach out at the NSA. So I taught behavior analysis out at the National Security Agency. And so it's just that intersection. By the way, Kevin Mitnick and I are good friends. So actually, a couple of the guys I trained at the FBI, I did in-service training for the FBI, were a couple of the ones involved in taking down Kevin Mitnick when he was arrested, which I remind him of that when we meet up. So so kind of, you know what? I have professional ADD. I don't do, I do a lot of things, but when I do them, I love doing them. And right now I'm actually doing a lot of work on something that gets me out of the tech field, but I work on a lot of cold case homicides. So I actually have 3 cases sitting behind me right now on the floor, big notebooks, and we're developing a new way to connect people to cases based on what we call social DNA. So I think there's some very interesting stuff out there to focus on.
That's really cool. That's a very varied background, but all really interesting stuff.
That was the short version. You want the long version?
I don't know that we have time for the long version today.
Sorry about that, man. You can edit out whatever you feel like. Oh, by the way, one other thing, too, as some little farm boy from Kansas, I actually have testified twice before Congress on the safety and security of healthcare.gov. And that was interesting, being in front of Congress, because obviously healthcare.gov was a big system, but realizing if folks out there knew, and this is both sides of the aisle, if they really knew how little politicians and members of Congress knew about the things that they are legislating, it would shock a lot of people. So, I mean, one of my biggest things is I've always wanted to make sure we try and teach the next generation of leadership. They know about budgets, they know about money, but man, I'll tell you, you know it, and I know it. They've got to know about technology, because everything is about software. Every company is a software company, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I've always been very nervous about the legislation coming out about FCC and net neutrality, no net neutrality. And I think there's a bunch of stuff. Section 230 proposals changes came out today. But do you know what Section 230 is?
I was actually supposed to be on Cheddar TV today talking about Section 230, and I'm actually tangentially had a big break in one of the homicide cases, cold cases I'm working on. So we had to have a quick call with medical examiner and stuff. So no, I've turned that down. But actually, Ajit Pai is originally from Kansas, and I do a lot of stuff for the media. And we've met a couple times when I've been in the green room of some of these news organizations waiting to go on air. I had a chance to talk with him.
That's cool. So back to the intelligence community, you had mentioned that you had worked for and with the intelligence community. One of the things that I've noticed in watching news lately is the reporters often talk about the intelligence community is telling the government, it doesn't really matter who, that there's these disinformation campaigns happening and that we need to be prepared. But the one thing that irks me as a television viewer is what's the disinformation? How do I as a consumer spot this information? That's nice that the government wants to know about it, but if I'm the intended target and I'm the intended person who's being influenced, shouldn't I know exactly what's being talked about? So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's go through disinformation, misinformation, interference, and influence. Let's talk about each of those.
Well, let's talk about defining the difference between disinformation and misinformation. So disinformation is part of what they call malign influence. This is information that is intentionally changed to achieve a particular objective. And so if I was spreading disinformation, I would say that Billy Bob Smith is a known pedophile, let's say. I know that's not the truth, but I'm spreading disinformation because I want to sow community outrage against Billy Bob Smith. But if I have 10 people tell me that Billy Bob Smith is a pedophile, and I want to, all I do is I repeat what I've heard from 10 other people, only to find out later it's not true. That's misinformation. I believe the information was correct, but I shared it, as opposed to somebody who knows what the truth is, or it doesn't even matter if it's the truth. They know what they're creating is fictitious. It's a lie, and they spread that information. So let's talk for a minute about why disinformation is so effective. MIT just did a research study, and I think it was maybe 6 months ago, maybe to a year, but they watched Twitter, because Twitter was a very quick way to be able to monitor conversations and look at keywords, and be able to code those words. Disinformation and misinformation, fake news, whatever you want to call it, spread 6 times faster on Twitter than did legitimate, truthful news. So what does that tell you? It validates what Mark Twain said, a century and a half ago. A lie can make it halfway around the world before the truth can lace its shoes up. But it's effective because it hones in on people's biases. They have a cognitive bias, maybe, or they have a inherent bias towards a certain point of view. And if they hear something that reflects that point of view, they're willing to spread it. So what the Russians have been good at doing, by the way, the Russians have been doing this since 1917, since World War I. The original intelligence agency was called the Cheka. The Vicheka. And then it became the NKVD, some variations there. Then it became the KGB, and now it's the FSB and the SVR. The Russians have been doing this game for 113 years. So when Facebook was duped in 2016 and Twitter, I don't know that I really blame them, because guess what? You got Mark Zuckerberg. I'm sorry, the dude still looks like he's got rosy cheeks, and does his mom know he's playing CEO at a multi-billion-dollar company? I don't care how much AI you put into it. When you put people who are grandmasters of chess, people who have been in the intelligence game for 113 years, at that time, 9 years, they're going to win. You know why? Because they will understand how the system works. They'll understand how to do things that take advantage of the way the system works. And if you want to see a great documentary about this, I think it's on Netflix. It's called The Social Dilemma. Listen to what all of these insiders from companies like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Pinterest and all, what they say about what's really happening on the inside. So it is no surprise is that it is so easy to use social media to spread not only disinformation, which is intentional, but misinformation, which is good-hearted. But misinformation could actually be disinformation. In other words, I receive some disinformation, but I believe that it's true, so I spread it. So now I am not spreading disinformation. I'm spreading their disinformation, but it's misinformation because I believe it to be true. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it's kind of a long-winded way to get back to it, where when we talk about disinformation and misinformation, I might just genuinely believe a point of view that is factually later proved to be wrong, but I genuinely believe it. That's misinformation. But disinformation is when I intentionally target you with an active campaign to undermine, undercut, create division.
Gotcha. It's interesting because it sounds like the Russians are really just taking advantage of the way these social media platforms and honestly a lot of the other internet is designed is that they're looking at what's, for lack of not the right word, but they're looking for breaking news, what's topical, what's relevant today, what has velocity. There's increasing discussion of this, so let's push this out more than we would something that isn't as doesn't have that same velocity to it.
Remember, in 2016, the Internet Research Agency, which is no doubt an arm of the Russian government. I've talked to Vladimir personally about this. I've confirmed this. Now, is that disinformation or information? No, just joking. I've never talked personally to Vladimir Putin. But you're talking about, a few dozen people, a couple $100,000, and look what they were able to do in the 2016 elections. So to your point, if you can understand how news spreads, if you can understand the algorithms that are used to identify what's breaking, what's trending, and take advantage of those things and create groups and get, to your point, not only velocity, but you get you get that inflection point to where you've got a big mass of people. You've got critical mass now that now when they start taking action, they can actually influence things. That's the real danger. And what's proved out when you look at countries like India, some other places over in Southeast Asia, there have been people killed, men killed, simply because rumors spread on social media that they were pedophiles or that they had molested a child or that they had done something. Enough people believe the group hysteria that they actually are dealing with the death of people who are in no way connected to any of this stuff, but the rumors spread. You had the mass hysteria, and now people have died as a result of rumors spread on the internet.
Yeah, that's very similar. That makes me think very similarly of Pizzagate, with the there's the pedophile ring going on in the basement of this particular pizza place, which doesn't have a basement, and some guy showed up with an assault rifle at the front door. Now, luckily, he didn't. I don't believe he actually ended up killing anybody, but
that was right over here in D.C. I mean, that was actually one of the segments showed on the show on that documentary, The Social Dilemma. Yeah, but people start believing this. They start believing this disinformation, and the reason that spread too? One of the reasons that spread is because Facebook's own algorithms and Twitter's own algorithms realize, hey, you like stuff like this, so I'm going to connect you with like-minded people. And then all of a sudden, I've got an echo chamber here to where everybody I'm talking to believes in the same thing. And it spreads and it spreads. So, yeah, Pizzagate is a perfect example. I mean, when I see stuff, but the real shame is? The real shame is we've lost the ability to be cynical enough to the point of where you've got to take the advice of Edgar Allan Poe. He said, believe nothing that you hear and only one half that you see.
Mm-hmm. That's good advice. Okay, so we've talked about disinformation and misinformation, and we'll cycle back to those in a minute. But interference and influence, are these parallels in the same way disinformation and misinformation are?
They are cousins, absolutely. And so one of the ways it works, look, interference is a sovereignty issue. If the Russians came over and landed, 10,000 troops, AKA Red Dawn, like the old movie, or that they came in and they burned down a polling station, or they were on sovereign U.S. territory, that could be called interference. That could even be an act of war in some places. But look, when it comes to influence, let's make sure people understand is that the United States has spent a great deal of money in the influence operation as well. Mm-hmm. Psychological operations, influence operations. When you go back and you read all the biographies of the directors of Central Intelligence, and I have a ton of them on my Kindle, on my wicked cool iPad Pro that I just recently got right back here. Yes, oh man, I love that thing. But I have so many books on there, but you read the biographies and they will tell you that they spent $1 million on a spoiling operation in Venezuela. Why? To prevent the spread of communism in the Western Hemisphere, because during that time, during the Cold War, we were worried about the spread of communism. We would spend money to influence elections. Now, if we interfered elections, that means we would go down and actually steal ballots, change votes, kill politicians, which is prohibited by executive order or supposed to be. But so influence the Russians. So the Russians' campaign in 2016 through the use of disinformation was actually an influence operation designed to affect how people thought and what they did. What it was? It's a massive influence is a massive social engineering operation. That's what it boils down to.
So if we've been doing this ourselves, how is it that we're so vulnerable to it? Or is it just inherent in what it is?
So when you go back and you look at Reporters Without Borders does a scorecard every year, and you look at the nations that have the freest press, Russia and China are like around 98 to 10 to 118. Try searching for Tiananmen Square inside the country of China. Impossible. So that our liberty, our freedom is part of what makes it easy to conduct influence operations like this, because we don't have the Great Firewall of China. We don't have an oppressive regime that kills reporters and kills newspaper editors and shuts down entire papers because they don't like what they're printing. Imagine just for a minute, regardless of who's president, imagine if a U.S. president just woke up one morning and decided they did not like what the Washington Post wrote. We are taking over the Washington Post and shutting it down. I can tell you, I've got friends on both sides of the aisles. I got friends who are as far one direction as I am the other. Nobody wants the government coming in and doing stuff like that. So the mere fact that we have this kind of freedom is one of the things that makes it easy for people to use. Basically, they do us in with our own hand.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's with great freedom comes great responsibility. I guess it's great power comes great responsibility. With great freedom comes great responsibility.
Yes, it does. And actually, and as Thomas Jefferson said one time too, said eternal vigilance, or the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. So we have to be eternally vigilant, ever vigilant against this type of stuff.
So since we've used the word vigilant here, how can we be more vigilant in identifying disinformation and interference? And what can we as citizens and consumers do?
Good question. I don't know how some of this stuff is so sophisticated. I'm telling you, even trained professionals miss the disinformation sometimes. So you've got trained analysts, you've got trained people that miss the disinformation as well. But I think what people need to do is they need to stop, take a breath. Remember, we're not storming the beaches at Normandy here, people. You don't have to react to this. In fact, I've gotten to the point on Facebook or Twitter. I'm on there for a variety of reasons. One, it's a great research tool. Two, like we were talking about, doing my Peloton group, my buddies in Peloton, my Peloton military veterans, law enforcement groups. It's a great way to stay connected and share information about our workouts. But when I see stories coming across, it takes me now about a half a second to look at a story and realize, as the Scottish say, it's crap, lad. It's crap. You don't react to it, and do some due diligence. There's obviously, as we're speaking right now, and this, obviously this is going to come out later, but the decision on in Louisville on the Breonna Taylor shooting has been released. So there was a lot of misinformation about what's going on. That misinformation led to certain things happening. So one of the things people need to do is just don't spread. Tom Hanks does not come out and do a meme about the Breonna Taylor case. As cool as it sounds, Tom Hanks is not sitting there making memes going, I think I need to make a statement about this case, and then somebody spreads it. And because it has Tom Hanks in it and everybody loves Tom Hanks, they spread it as though it's fact. Come on, people. Who's that? Dr. Phil says, let's get real. Just, critical thinking. Step back and say, and I'll tell you, the biggest thing you can do, too, especially if you're parents, and I know you focus in on this, too. I did a lot of research on the effects of social media, suicide, and on kids. Parents have to be vigilant about monitoring what their kids consume, what they see, what they hear. This right now starts forming the basis of what they see, what they believe, how they view the world. So part of it is what can you do short term, which is just go back to Edgar Allan Poe. Believe, nothing that you hear and only one half that you see. And with parents, they've got to be very vigilant about curating what their children consume.
But isn't it also true that in some sense the parents need to be careful what they're curating for themselves? We talked about echo chambers. If you just sit and watch Fox News or you just sit and watch MSNBC, you're going to be skewed one way or the other. I mean, how do you become balanced when news sources are potentially so contradictory on the same sort of news stories?
Yeah. I tell you that I wish I knew the answer to that question, because that would be I would be a millionaire and I wouldn't be doing this podcast right now. I'd be on an island somewhere in my Tommy Bahama. But I'll tell you, it's got to go back to adults being adults. I got a good friend of mine. He was actually a lawyer on the Watergate Commission, and him and I have diametrically opposed political views, but we are great friends. We played in a band together. We were both on the board of a nonprofit together. But because we were adults, we could sit down and have a rational exchange of ideas. I would attempt to convince convince him of certain things. He'd attempt to convince me of certain things. And like on social media and stuff, he's one of the few people I make sure that I watch, because you have to be open to opposing viewpoints. You have to be open to listening to not alternate, theories in terms of, I think Kennedy was shot, by 14 Russians. There's a limit to what you have to be able to put the boundaries around. But I think one of the great tragedies has been that echo chamber. We get to the point of where we only hear what we want to hear. We're incapable of hearing other opinions, and we don't even want to hear it. I'm like you. Even though I've done over 500 segments on the national news around, I'm fond of saying I do ones and zeros, not R's and D's. I talk about technology, but I've been on networks that would be considered conservative, networks that would be considered liberal, and networks that are, so I used to write for The Hill, kind of a center-right publication. But it's we have lost the ability to, I think, really a lot of times to sit back. Think about the days of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, to where you could still be adversaries, still be the loyal opposition, and still get things done. I look for those things to where politicians also need to set the example. I look for those things. Where are the things that we can agree to work on? And let's stop the ad hominem attacks. Let's stop the use of, derogatory terms about how we describe everybody. And look, just get back. It ought to go back to, I like Ben Shapiro has a saying too. He says, facts don't care about your feelings. I think if people got down and they really started doing a better job about researching the facts and being more informed, but nobody's going to do that. We cannot get enough people to do that right now, because it's too easy to pick up your iPhone and scroll through Facebook and get information fed to you based on what you believe. And then that resonance, that bias tends to be confirmed over and over again, because that's the only thing you see.
Yeah, that's the challenging aspect, is we like to think we're in control of what we're watching and what we're seeing and what we're doing. We think we are. Maybe some of us don't think we are, but I think a lot of people do think, well, no, this is the information. But it's really, and I think the confusion, for some people, is that there's a perception that a particular social media platform has this bias, that it has a left bias or it has a right bias. I'd say that all of them have both, in that, well, if you're left, you're going to get left. You're going to get, if you're conservative, you're going to get conservative bias in all that you see. If you're a liberal, you're going to get a liberal bias in all that you see. So yeah, they are biased, but I don't think they're inherently trying to push an agenda, but more that they're just that echo chamber for you.
Yeah, it's interesting, because one of the things I'm working on actually is a documentary. A friend of mine does executive produces for a major TV personality of a show he has. And we actually are working on a documentary right now, and it's actually on the John Benet Ramsey case. And one of the things we're doing that's different is we're really going in depth on it. We're explaining, and rather than saying, well, the Ramseys had to do it or had to be an intruder, what we're simply saying is we're going to go deep now and on the facts and expose you to all the facts so you can see them. And one of the admonitions I give when we do stuff like that, it actually goes back to Sherlock Holmes. And it was basically a scandal in Bohemia. He said it is a capital mistake to theorize before one has all the data. Insidiously what happens is that you twist facts to fit theories, or twist facts to suit theories, instead of twisting theories to suit facts. And I think what we get is we get too many people that have figured out this is what they want. So no matter what the theory is, they're going to make the facts fit their particular theory, and again, it goes back to, if you just say facts don't care about your feelings, if you just simply go to the facts and start doing, but nobody wants to do nobody wants to do their own research. They just want it spoon fed to them right now, because we become too lazy to do what used to be done, which is when I remember years ago when I was a detective, I wrote an article about the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And I did a ton of research to show how marijuana is this, and I don't want to get into a discussion about that because I know people have two sides. But what I'm saying is, but when I presented my point of view, I backed it up with research. I backed it up with reports. I did a lot of work, and I put it as a letter to the editor, and I did the research. And now I think too many people, they throw an opinion out on Twitter and somebody repeats it, and all of a sudden, well, that's a fact. It is not a fact, people. It's an opinion. Facts are different than opinions. You're entitled, as they say, right? You're entitled to your opinion, but not your own facts.
Well, not anymore, apparently. We do have, if I remember the expression, we do do have alternate facts now.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. And there was no moon landing. There are people who still believe the Earth is flat,
I did have a great previous episode on conspiracy theories and why we believe them. And probably the most disturbing reason of why we believe them is because some of them are founded in reality.
And that's the trap with conspiracy theories is they feed you just enough kernels of truth that it sounds real. And then what you do is you insert a variation. And I will tell you one of the worst ones, and this is the one to this day, just ticks me off to no end because I live in Northern Virginia. I walked across the Roslyn Bridge. I saw the Pentagon burning. Several of my friends who work for the Arlington, by the way, the Pentagon is in Arlington County, Virginia, not Washington, D.C. So the first responders were Arlington County Police. Flight 93, which I passed those guys that morning because I drove past Dulles Airport, and I passed the guys who were going to the airport at Dulles to hijack that plane, which was then eventually flown into the Pentagon. I mean, don't tell me is that this was a conspiracy by the government, that there was no plane that hit. But this is what happens. And I think it was a documentary called Loose Change, and in spite of all the scientific evidence, in spite of all the parts that were recovered, where did these 93 people go? Where did all the people on board go? Where did the pilots go? Where did the flight attendants go? The passengers? We can't explain that, but it's a government theory. Look, apparently at that time, nobody believed Bush was a very smart guy, but he was smart enough to create a conspiracy theory that said the government brought down the Twin Towers. And it's like the moon landing. I posted a meme about the moon landing. I said, congratulations. In 50 years, nobody's leaked the truth, that there was no landing, that you guys have kept a secret. Oh, come on. Just be cynical. Go back to being cynical and say, nah, I don't believe you.
I have my own perspective on why people want to believe 9/11 conspiracies is that it's much easier to believe that there was this massive conspiracy, this evil force at work in the government that involved hundreds, if not thousands of people, than to believe less than 20 guys could have wreaked so much trauma in the United States in such a short period of time, and we didn't know about it.
Yep.
And seated with that, that's a whole lot scarier of like, oh my gosh, I'm not as safe as I really think I am. So it's easier to believe in a conspiracy. And
I will tell you, I looked at that. I ended up briefing at that time the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, James Comey, the Attorney General, John Ashcroft. They took a lot of our material for the 9/11 Commission hearings, and we looked at a lot at 6 of the 19 hijackers had contact with law enforcement. Nawaf al-Hazmi was stopped in April of 2001 by the Oklahoma Highway Patrol and written a traffic ticket. Yet in August of that year, the State Department puts him on a watch list. Why do you put somebody on a watch list for coming into the country when they're already in the country? So one of the biggest findings out of the 9/11 Commission was a failure of imagination. We could not imagine that somebody would hijack 4 airplanes and fly them into things. But guess what? It goes back to, and there's a great little exercise I used to teach people in intelligence and detectives, and it's hard to do on a podcast. But if you guys will do this, take a sheet of paper and draw 3 rows of 3 dots. So it's like a box, 3 rows of 3 dots. And then what I want you to do is connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines. Don't take your pen off the paper. And what happens is people stay within the lines. Some of you will figure it out, but you have to go outside the box. So that's where outside the box thinking actually came from. So the good guys, we have to operate within the box, but to defeat the bad guys, we have to think outside the box. You can't operate outside the box, but you can think outside the box. And so when you go up way above the top of the top line and then come down, back over and up, you can connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines if you will just take a chance and think outside the box.
I like that. Is there anything else, any final words of advice that you have for the audience before we finish up today?
Well, I'm going to assume that this podcast will make it out before the November 3rd elections.
Yes,
right?
It will.
So here's my challenge to everybody. If you listen to the news, don't believe a thing you hear. If you hear something that strikes a chord, then do your own independent research before you share it on social media, before you share it with a friend, or ask a friend, say, look, here's what I saw. What do you see? What's your opinion? Get a conversation going. But for heaven's sakes, do not share something simply because it showed up in your news feed. If you want to defeat disinformation, I think one of the best tactics is to do nothing. Don't share it. Don't send it to your friends. Don't say that Joe Biden is a known criminal and Donald Trump is about to invoke the War Powers Act and, impose martial law. I mean, please, we have survived over 200 years in this country with peaceful transitions of power. We will have another one because we're the great. I'm biased. We're the greatest nation on earth. I've been to probably 60 different countries. I will tell you, the United States is the greatest nations on earth. And no offense against our UK friends, but we did win the war, so they need to deal with that, right? So, but I'm telling you, people just try doing this. Try for 48 hours doing nothing. Don't click a link. Don't share information. Don't spread anything, and just let things kind of die a natural death, because the oxygen that this disinformation needs and these people who commit influence operations, the oxygen is you. It's you clicking that link and sharing it as soon as you get it, which creates the virality. The kill chain is kill the virality. Don't do anything for 48 hours. And if you still think it's a good idea after 48 hours, then do a little bit of research, find reputable sources, known sources. And then if you think that, hey, yeah, this is true, then do what you feel like you need to do.
That is great advice. If anyone wants to follow you and find out more about you, how can they find you?
Well, it's classified. I'd like to tell you, but no.
we will not disclose your address or your phone number, but how can they find you on social media, which we've told them to avoid?
Don't dox me. Don't go on social media. But if you do go on social media, well, look, first of all, like I said, I represent a great company. I'm the chief security advisor for SentinelOne, so sentinel1.com and at SentinelOne. For me, it's at Morgan Wright _US, at Morgan Wright _US or morganwright.us. And look, I'm on LinkedIn too, and I've been all over. So if you can't find me on the internet, you are not trying hard enough.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Morgan.
Hey, thank you. And look, and congrats too on doing this, because we need more podcasts that take the time to educate people and get people to think critical and take action. The biggest thing you got to do is take action.
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Prey podcast. If you found this episode helpful, share it with someone you know and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Morgan Wright can be found at easyprey.com/32.